the night Sable Merritt pulled a man back from the edge of death using nothing but a ballpoint pen, a roll of medical tape, and 37 years of secrets she'd never told a single soul. That was the night the Greystone County Public Library became something no one in this town would ever forget. It was past 11 when the last patron left. Sable had watched him go from behind the circulation desk, a retired school teacher who came every Tuesday to read agricultural journals and fall asleep in the periodical's chair. She draped a wool blanket over his shoulders at 9, the way she always did, and at 10:50 he'd shuffled out with a wave that was more a reflex than a goodbye. The heavy oak doors swung shut, the lock clicked, and then it was just Sable. She didn't mind the quiet. She'd built her life around it. 12 years at the Greystone County Public Library, the last 4 as head librarian, and she had come to regard the hush of closing time as something close to sacred, the moment when the building exhaled. The fluorescent overheads cut to the amber security lighting. The card catalog computers went dark. The only sound left was the low, reliable hum of the HVAC and the occasional creak of the old building settling into the cold. Sable Merritt, at 31, looked exactly like what people expected a small-town librarian to look like. Brown hair twisted into a practical knot, reading glasses perched on her nose even when she wasn't reading. Sensible shoes. A cardigan in a color that couldn't quite decide between gray and green. She had the kind of face people forgot between conversations. Not plain, exactly, but arranged in a way that invited no particular attention. The Greystone Register had profiled her twice in 4 years, and both times the photographer had struggled to make her look interesting. That was intentional. She was shelving the returns from the evening drop box, methodical, cart, aisle by aisle, the way she'd shelved 10,000 books before, when she heard it, a sound from the reading room that had no business being there. A breath. Shallow. Ragged. The breath of someone trying very hard not to be heard. Sable didn't stop moving. She pushed the cart another 2 feet, turned it into the 900s aisle, and set a copy of The Battle of the Bulge precisely where it belonged. Her pulse, to her own quiet surprise, was perfectly steady. She had trained herself out of flinching a long time ago. She moved toward the sound the way she moved through everything. Unhurried, unremarkable, a woman retrieving a misplaced book. The reading room was a long, low-ceilinged space at the back of the library's ground floor, lined with tall windows that faced the parking lot. At this hour, those windows were black mirrors. The tables and carrel chairs cast long shadows under the amber lights. She found him between the last table and the emergency exit. He was maybe 40, broad-shouldered even in collapse, dressed in civilian clothes that were soaked through with blood from a wound somewhere below his ribs. He'd dragged himself behind the reading table and was sitting with his back against the wall. One hand pressed hard against his side, the other flat on the floor. His face was the color of old paper. His eyes, when they found hers, were doing the math that people in his condition always did. Can she help me, or will she run? Don't, he said. The word cost him something. Don't what? Sable said quietly. Scream. Call anyone. I need 5 minutes. She looked at him. Really looked. The position of the wound, the color of the blood, the rate at which he was breathing, the way his lips had gone slightly blue at the edges. You don't have 5 minutes, she said. She crossed to the emergency exit, confirmed the alarm was armed. It was, and then went to the cabinet beside the reading room's reference desk. She'd stocked it herself, years ago, when she first came to Greystone, quietly adding items to the standard first aid kit that no one had questioned because no one paid close enough attention to what a librarian ordered. Trauma shears. Hemostatic gauze, a compression bandage, a chest seal, a tourniquet still in its original packaging. The man watched her come back with the kit. Something shifted in his face. You're not a librarian, he said. I'm an excellent librarian, she said, and knelt beside him. Lift your hand. His name, he told her between gritted teeth while she worked, was Rourke, just Rourke. He didn't offer more and she didn't ask. The wound was a through and through. Entry just below the floating ribs, exit clean, which was the only piece of luck either of them had going tonight. He'd lost significant blood, but the bleeding was controllable. She packed the wound with hemostatic gauze, her hands moving with an efficiency that was not the efficiency of a librarian. applied the compression bandage in too tight, even passes, and had him breathing easier within 4 minutes. "There's a hospital," Rourke said, watching her. 20 minutes out. I know where the hospital is." "So why?" "Because whoever did this to you," she said, not looking up. "Maybe watching the hospital. And because you said don't call anyone, which tells me you're not sure who you can trust." She tied off the bandage. "Am I wrong?" He was quiet for a moment. "No." She sat back on her heels and looked at him directly. "Then tell me what we're dealing with." What Rourke told her, in the quiet of the reading room with the amber lights humming above them, was this. He was a federal investigator, not FBI, not ATF, something that sat in the gap between agencies and was never mentioned in budget hearings. He had been working for 9 months on a case involving a man named Aldrich Sen, a defense contract where clearances and a secondary income stream that ran through 3 shell companies in the Cayman Islands and ended, if you followed it far enough, in the hands of people who sold information about American military operations to whoever paid the right price. Rourke had gotten close. Close enough that 3 days ago, someone had made the calculation that close was too close. He'd been shot in a parking structure in Bridgeport, 40 miles from here. He'd driven until he couldn't drive anymore. He'd ended up in the Greystone Library parking lot because the lights were still on. "The case files," Sable said. "What? You have case files, evidence. Something that can't die with you." He looked at her for a long moment. "On a drive. In my jacket pocket." "Then we need to make sure," she said, "that the right people get it." She stood, stripped off her gloves, and moved to the circulation desk. "And we need to make sure that the wrong people don't get here first." She had barely finished saying it when headlights swept across the tall reading room windows. The parking lot had been empty when the school teacher left at 10:50. Sable had watched him go. She knew every car that belonged to the evening staff, all of them gone by 10. There was no reason for headlights in this lot at 11:15 on a Tuesday in February. She reached the light panel behind the circulation desk and dropped the amber security lights to 0. The library went dark except for the green exit signs and the thin blue glow of the emergency system. She moved without hurrying to the reading room doorway and looked out at Rourke, who had heard the car and was already trying, uselessly, to get to his feet. "Stay down," she said, low and even. "Stay against that wall and don't move unless I tell you." "You should leave," he said. "Go out the back. This isn't my building," she said. "My call." She went back to the circulation desk. The library's layout was something she knew the way a pianist knows a keyboard, not by thinking about it, but by some deeper registration that lived below thought. The front entrance, 2 oak doors, heavy, with a deadbolt she had thrown herself at closing time. The side door, east wing, alarmed. The emergency exit in the reading room, alarmed. The loading dock at the back, used for book deliveries, accessible from a maintenance corridor that ran behind the children's section. She heard the car door close. 1 door, 1 person and others waiting outside. She moved to the children's section and crouched behind the low shelving. From here, she had a sight line to the loading dock door and partial coverage of the main entrance. She reached into the supply cabinet at the end of the shelving unit, the one that held craft scissors and rubber cement for story hour, and found, beneath a box of construction paper, the compact tactical flashlight she had kept there for 4 years without ever needing it. Until tonight. The sound came from the loading dock, not a forced entry. The door opened with a key, or something performing as a key. Slow, careful. The sound of someone who had done their preparation. The man who entered the library was not what people imagined when they imagined a threat. He was trim, well-dressed in a dark wool coat, somewhere in his mid-50s. He moved through the maintenance corridor with the ease of someone who had reviewed a floor plan. In his right hand, held low and easy at his side, was a suppressed handgun. In his left, a small flashlight that he was using in narrow, deliberate sweeps. He wasn't a hitman in the Hollywood sense. He was something more precise and more dangerous. A professional sent to close an open file. Sable recognized the type. She had, once upon a time, been adjacent to that world in a way she did not discuss with anyone in Greystone County. She watched him clear the maintenance corridor and pause at the entrance to the children's section. He was good. He checked corners. He moved quietly. He was doing everything right. But he didn't know the building. She knew where the third-floor tile from the left squeaked when weight hit it wrong. She knew that the shelving unit between biography and large print cast a shadow at this angle that looked like an open space, but wasn't. She knew that if you came in from the loading dock and turned right toward the reading room, you walked directly beneath the skylight well, and that the skylight well had a rope pulley system for the automated shade that Sable had quietly reinforced with a double-weave cable 2 years ago when she'd noticed a structural concern and filed a maintenance report that no one had ever followed up on. She didn't need to beat him. She just needed to slow him down long enough. She let him get 3 steps into the children's section. Then she hit the skylight shade release. The automated shade came down with a sound like a fast exhale, and the heavy bottom rail caught the man squarely across the shoulders. It wasn't designed as a weapon. It wasn't enough to put him down, but it was enough to break his stride, make him stumble, make him drop his flashlight. The light rolled under the shelving and the section went dark. In the dark, Sable moved. She had the advantage she'd always had in every difficult room she'd ever been in. She was not afraid of the dark, and she knew exactly where everything was. She came around the end of the biography shelf while he was still regaining his footing, knocked his gun arm up with a forearm strike that had 20 years of muscle memory behind it, and drove a library cart. Full 60 pounds of returned hardcovers into his midsection with everything she had. He went into the shelving. Books came down. He was big enough and trained enough that he didn't go all the way down, but he went sideways. And, in the second that bought her, Sable reached the emergency intercom panel on the east wall and hit the button that connected directly to the Greystone County Sheriff's substation 4 blocks away. "This is Sable Merritt at the public library," she said, her voice as level as if she were announcing story time. "I have an armed intruder and a critically wounded man who needs emergency medical transport. I need units and an ambulance at the loading dock entrance. The intruder has a suppressed firearm. Do not approach from the front." Static. Then, "Ms. Merritt, we are dispatching now. Please." She had already stepped away from the panel. The man in the wool coat had found his footing. He'd also found his gun, which was the more pressing problem. She could see him now. Her eyes had adjusted, and the exit T sign threw just enough green light to read shapes. He was moving toward the sound of her voice at the intercom, which was no longer where she was. She was already at the reference desk, where she had left the trauma kit. There was one more thing in that kit that no county budget had approved. A collapsible baton, 8 inches closed. She had never once used it in 12 years. She'd always hoped she wouldn't need to. She flicked it open in the dark. He came around the end of the shelving, and she was standing right there, close enough that the gun was a problem she could neutralize before he could bring it level. She stepped inside his arm, the way you step inside a door before it closes, and used the baton on his wrist. He lost the gun. She used the baton again, lower, and he went to one knee. When he tried to come back up, she had the trauma kit's compression strap around his wrists in a figure 8, and she pulled it tight enough that getting free would require either a knife or a great deal of time. He had neither. She sat back, breathing, steady. "My name is Sable Merritt," she said to the man on the floor. "I have been the head librarian of this building for 4 years. Before that, I was something else entirely, and I am very happy to keep that private, but you have made it exceedingly difficult tonight." She picked up his gun with 2 fingers, checked the safety, and set it on the reference desk, well out of his reach. "The sheriff's department will be here in approximately 3 minutes. I'd recommend staying where you are." From the reading room, Rourke's voice came. "Merritt." She crossed to him. He was still against the wall, but he'd managed to get partially upright, one hand braced on the baseboard. His color was worse than 3 minutes ago, but not catastrophically so. "That was," he said, and seemed to be searching for the word. "Efficient. I had good teachers," she said. "Who were you?" "Before." She looked at him for a moment. Outside, she could already hear it. The faint wail of sirens moving toward them through the winter dark, getting louder, the specific frequency of help coming. "Someone who got tired," she said. and found a better use for quiet. She went and unlocked the loading dock door so the sheriff's deputies wouldn't have to break it. Then, she went back to the reference desk, straightened a stack of periodicals that had been knocked askew during the struggle, and waited. The first deputy through the door was a young man named Cutler, who had checked out into thin air twice and never returned it. He looked at the man in the wool coat zip-tied on the floor, looked at Sable standing behind the reference desk with her cardigan still buttoned and her reading glasses still on her nose, and opened his mouth. "He's secured," she said. "The injured man is in the reading room. He needs transport immediately. Gunshot wound, through and through below the floating ribs. I've packed and compressed, but he's lost significant blood and he needs a surgeon." She held out a small evidence bag she'd found in the supply cabinet. Inside, it was the suppressed handgun. "This belongs to your scene. I've only touched it on the barrel, fingerprint side away." Deputy Cutler stared at her. "The book," she said, not unkindly. "I'll need it back eventually." 2 more deputies came through behind him. Then the paramedics. The reading room filled up with radio chatter and the crinkle of medical packaging, and Sable stood where she'd been standing and let it all happen around her the way she let the library happen around her. Present but apart, the fixed point while everything else moved. A detective arrived 20 minutes later. Sandra Page, Greystone County Criminal Investigation Unit. Someone Sable had seen at the library fundraiser and the 4th of July block party, but had never had cause to speak with professionally. Detective Page was somewhere in her mid-40s, with the particular kind of tired that comes not from one bad night, but from a long accumulation of them. And she looked at Sable across the reference desk, with an expression that couldn't quite settle between impressed and suspicious. "Walk me through it," Detective Page said. Sable walked her through it. She left out, with practiced economy, certain biographical details that fell under classifications she had signed documents about a long time ago. What she gave Page was accurate and sufficient. She had heard an intruder. She had secured the wounded man. The intruder had entered through the loading dock. There had been an altercation. She had restrained him and called for help. "The altercation," Page said carefully. "Yes. He had a gun. He did. And you, what, exactly?" "I used what was available," Sable said. Page looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked at the man in the wool coat, now in actual handcuffs and sitting against the far wall between 2 deputies. Then she looked back at Sable. "You've been here 12 years, she said. 12 years in March, and before that?" A pause. Not the pause of someone deciding whether to lie, but the pause of someone deciding how much truth was necessary. "I worked for the government," Sable said, "in a different capacity." Page nodded slowly. She wrote something in her notepad. "The drive," she said, "the one the injured man mentioned to my deputies. You know what's on it? He told me it's evidence in an active federal investigation. I'd recommend getting it to the FBI field office in Hartford by morning, and I'd recommend calling the number he gave my deputies before you call anyone else." She paused. "That would be my professional opinion. As a librarian." Page almost smiled. Almost. Rourke was taken out on a stretcher at 12:40 in the morning. As they wheeled him past the circulation desk, he turned his head and found Sable's face in the crowded room without difficulty, as if he'd been tracking her position the whole time, the way trained people do. "You could come back," he said. She understood what he meant. It wasn't a compliment, and it wasn't an offer. It was an observation, the kind people make when they see something they recognize. "I know," she said. He was taken out. The library slowly emptied of official presences. The deputies, the paramedics, the detective, who left her card with a look that said they were not finished talking. The man in the wool coat was walked out in handcuffs and put in the back of a cruiser without ceremony. He had not, in all the time since his capture, said a single word. That told Sable something about who he worked for and how serious the case was and how right Rourke had been to avoid the hospital. At 2:15 in the morning, Sable was alone again. She stood at the circulation desk for a moment in the returning quiet. The amber security lights were back on. The HVAC hummed. The books stood in their rows, exactly where they belonged. She went and retrieved the cart she'd left in the 900s aisle, right where she'd left it when she'd gone to investigate the sound, and pushed it back toward the circulation desk. shelving the returns properly before she locked up for the night. Doing what she always did. She found one more book that needed to go back. The Battle of the Bulge, which had fallen off the cart in the commotion and slid 3 feet down the aisle. She picked it up, checked it for damage. The spine was fine, the pages uninjured, and walked it to its place in the 940s. She slid it home. It fit, the way things fit when they've been returned to exactly where they belong. She turned off the lights, set the alarm, and walked out into the February dark. The parking lot was empty. The sirens were long gone. The cold bit at her cheeks, and her breath came in small white clouds, and above the bare maples, the stars were sharp and countless, the way they get in winter, when the air has no patience for haze. Sable Merritt pulled her cardigan tighter and walked to her car. Nobody watched her go. Nobody ever did. That, too, was intentional.